Welcome to the 2011 College of Law Canon Lecture. I am pleased to see President Lloyd Jacobs, Provost William McMillan, Chancellor Jeffrey Gold, and several deans of the UT colleges here and other distinguished guests. Thank you very much for being here. This is an active week at the College of Law, especially regarding labor law. On Friday, this Friday, our Law Review will host a symposium on public sector labor law at the Crossroads here in this auditorium. It's free and open to the public. Information about the symposium and CLE opportunities is on our website. And on Thursday, 4 students will argue the finals of our internal moot court competition in its 40th anniversary year in front of a panel of federal judges. The Canon Lectureship, today's lecture, is our oldest lecture series. The series was established in 1980 in memory of Toledo attorney Joseph A. Canon through a generous gift from his family and friends. The lectureship was designed to provide an opportunity for the College of Law, the university, and the greater Toledo community to host individuals of national prominence who, in discussing questions of law and society, will emphasize the humanistic dimensions as well as the limitations of our legal system. For 40 years, we've had a very distinguished list of judges, law professors, journalists, and other public figures who have spoken as Canon lecturers, and today's speaker is a worthy addition. To introduce him, it is my pleasure to call on Joseph SLATER, the John W. Stepler Professor of Law and Values. Professor SLATER has been a member of the faculty since 1999 and teaches torts, labor law, public sector labor law, employment law, and employment discrimination. Public sector labor law has been much in the news this year, and Professor SLATER has been quoted in media throughout the country and indeed the world. Not only is he an excellent teacher, but he is also a productive and well-respected scholar. One of his publications is a book, Public Workers, Government Employee Unions, the Law, and the State from 1900 to 1962. With this background, and more that you will hear shortly, Professor SLATER is the ideal person to introduce today's speaker. Please join me in welcoming Professor SLATER.
Thank you, Dean Steinbock. My first memory of Seth, or Deputy Harris as he insists that I call him, was at a law conference almost a decade ago. I was watching some panel on labor law, and I was trying to think of some intelligent comment to make at the end of the panel, and before I could, Seth raised his hand and said pretty much the sort of thing that I was thinking of saying, except he said it in a smarter and much more articulate way than I was going to say it. My second memory of Seth was actually him complimenting me on a black raincoat I was wearing, although I guess that saying that makes you look like a member of the KGB is a compliment. The next thing I remember about Seth is him asking me to write a case book with him that would combine public sector labor law and private sector labor law, and I agreed and was flattered because I had long admired his work. And we did a few chapters together, and I again was convinced that Seth and I shared similar views about labor law, but he was smarter and more articulate than I was. After we started on the book, Seth got involved in the Obama campaign. He obviously impressed them as well. When he became Deputy Secretary of Labor, of course, he could no longer continue working on the book. Seth taking this position was good for him, good for the Obama administration, and, I mean this sincerely, good for the American people. On the other hand, it made my life a little more complicated, at least in the short term. I'll invite members of the audience to weigh those competing concerns during the talk, but really it's all okay now. But enough about me. Seth Harris was nominated to be Deputy Secretary of Labor in February of 2009. Before joining the Department of Labor, he was teaching at New York Law School and was director of its labor and employment law programs. Before that, he served at the Department of Labor under the Clinton administration in various policymaking positions. He earned his BA from the School of Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell University. He earned his JD at New York University School of Law, where he was editor-in-chief of the Review of Law and Social Change. He was a law clerk to Judge William Canby on the Ninth Circuit and to Judge Gene Carter of the U.S. District Court for the District of Maine. I am very proud and happy to introduce my friend and co-author, Deputy Secretary of Labor, Seth Harris.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Provost, Dean, my good friend Joe SLATER. Thank you for that generous introduction. Let me thank all of you for sitting as far away from me as possible. It's very much like being back in the classroom, so I appreciate it. And I'd like to thank all the members of the university leadership who are here, and to all of you for attending today. I know you have important studying that you should be doing right now, but I appreciate you taking the time out to be with me. And I'd also like to thank Associate Dean Nicole Porter for making the arrangements and inviting me out today. Let me just say, she's been trying to get me to come for about 18 months, so you think I would have prepared a little bit better, let's be honest. And also, let me say, with Joe and Nicole and Rebecca Zitlow and others on the faculty here, I don't want to give them big heads or anything, but I would say that the University of Toledo Labor and Employment Law program is absolutely one of the best in the country, and I'm really proud to be associated with everybody here at the school. My topic today is the role of workers in a 21st century economy, and it's a topic that is uppermost in many Americans' minds in these difficult economic times. But in order to envision the future for the workers in a 21st century economy, we must first acknowledge the forces at work on the middle class during both the Great Recession and for the decades that preceded it. As is often said, you can't know where you're going if you don't first understand where you've been. And the events of the past several years have provided a crash course in labor market dynamics for millions of workers across the United States. 2.5 years ago, when President Obama took office, our nation found itself in the depths of the worst economic downturn of the last 7 decades. The economy and the fate of millions of working families were teetering on the edge of a cliff. Hundreds of thousands of workers were losing their jobs every month. 700,000 jobs were lost in the month that President Obama was inaugurated. Many millions of workers who still had jobs worried that they were only a pink slip away from being laid off, from having their health insurance disappear, losing their homes, slipping out of the middle class for good, or watching their last pathway into the middle class get washed away. Working families watched as the American dream that's defined our country for generations threatened to evaporate before their eyes. Now, the president made a series of difficult choices that were harshly criticized at the time and are still being criticized today. But with American workers lending everything they had to the effort, the president and Congress pulled the economy back from the edge of that cliff. The actions taken by the president and this administration first slowed the trend of job loss and then reversed it. An administration that took office with an economy losing hundreds of thousands of jobs every month for months on end has seen nearly 2.4 million jobs created since the economy reached its low point in February of 2010. Many companies are reporting record profits. The American auto industry, declared all but dead a couple of years ago, has come roaring back. All 3 American automakers are turning a profit for the first time since 2004. All 3 are gaining market share for the first time since 1995. But I don't want to be accused of engaging in happy talk. More than 2.5 years later, the aftershocks of the Great Recession are still reverberating throughout the country. It's been a once-in-a-generation crisis, much worse and much longer than every prior recession since the end of the Great Depression. Economic growth and job creation are too slow. Far too many people are just barely getting by. Far too many families face bankruptcy or foreclosure. Far too many job seekers don't have access to the resources they need to update their skills and succeed in the workforce. Far too many small business owners don't have incentives to hire and expand. Far too many workers feel like they're fighting a losing battle for the protections that have been part of workplace life for decades. This month's employment report brought welcome news. The economy added 137,000 private sector jobs in September. The latest job numbers have calmed fears of a double-dip recession. They've reinforced the overall trend of private sector job creation, but the report also highlighted the characteristics that make this recession different from previous ones and point to the challenges that still lie ahead for a full recovery. 14 million Americans are unemployed. 6.2 million have been unemployed for 6 months or longer. The unemployment rate remains stubbornly and unacceptably high at 9.1%. The rates for returning veterans and workers of color are even higher than that. Countless others have become so demoralized after months or years of searching for a job that they've dropped out of the labor market entirely. A generation of college graduates and younger workers forced to move back home, delay starting their careers, or take low-wage, low-skilled jobs outside their fields of study will have trouble matching the career earnings of their counterparts who graduated just a few years before the start of the Great Recession. Older workers suffer much longer periods of unemployment now than they did before the Great Recession and face the most difficulty finding new work after being laid off. Too many workers with years of institutional knowledge and hard-won skills and experience will retire not by choice, but by necessity, without the financial security they once envisioned. The result has been both a loss of valuable experience in the labor market and an expanded strain on the safety nets designed to protect older workers. Now, let me be perfectly clear. Workers didn't cause the Great Recession, and they certainly have not prolonged it. To the contrary, American workers have met the harshest of economic challenges with astonishing resilience and resolve. Even with unemployment remaining stubbornly high, and with more than 4 unemployed people for every 1 open job, unemployed workers are generally staying in the labor force and continuing to search for work longer. Let me just say, Adam and I just came from a job fair being hosted by Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur downtown at the Seagate Center. And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of unemployed workers flooded into the room, eager to line up to have a chance at an interview for a job with an employer here in Toledo. Labor force participation has declined during this recession, but workers have made abundantly clear that they're not done yet. They want to do more for their families. They want to do more for their country. Community colleges are bursting at the seams across our country as many workers who lost their jobs immediately understood that they needed to upgrade, oops, lost my place, look at that. Needed to develop new skills to change careers or move up the ladder. Enrollment in community colleges has grown at 3 times the rate of 4-year colleges in the last several years, and the number of adults over 40 attending community colleges has doubled in the last decade. American workers were already among the most productive in the world, and the productivity of our workers was higher after the Great Recession than before it. American workers haven't been slacking off in the face of adversity. They remain the world's hardest workers. American workers' resilience, resolve, and ingenuity remain our most valuable assets. We just need government's policies to catch up. But we can't build 21st century economic policy if we treat these after effects of the Great Recession as though they represent an entirely new set of conditions for America and for American working families. We didn't get here just because of a recession that began in 2007. Our current conditions are best understood as the latest chapter in a much longer story of economic change for American workers and economic restructuring for the American economy. For decades, forces beyond the control of the typical worker have significantly altered the landscape of the American labor market. Real wages for the average worker have stagnated over the last 30 years, even as the productivity of workers has increased by 78%. Unions are a central pillar of America's middle class, critical contributors to economic growth, and still the most democratic means to solve workplace problems. But union density has shrunk from 1/3 of private sector workers in the 1950s to fewer than 1 in 14 today. Unionization rates in the private sector are at their lowest point since the enactment of the National Labor Relations Act. There are those who argue that unions are the cause of our economic woes. By fighting for fair wages and health care and pensions that support a dignified middle-class retirement, unions made us unproductive and economically irresponsible. That argument is simply wrong. And I'll go further. Economic crises should never be used to vilify groups that have won countless workplace victories for working Americans and provided a voice to workers on the shop floor, in the corporate boardroom, and to governments at every level. The remarkable information technology advances that have made American life easier and American business more productive have also opened up labor and product markets around the globe to US-based companies. Education levels and skill sets that once guaranteed employment and supported a middle-class lifestyle don't quite cut it in the face of global competition and accelerating technological innovation. Throughout it all, American workers have retained their characteristic toughness, their willingness to do what it takes to provide for themselves and their families. But the changes of the last few decades have conspired to leave many workers feeling as if the ground has shifted beneath their feet, or perhaps more precisely, that the rug has been pulled out from beneath them. And they've forced workers and employers, scholars and policymakers to confront fundamental questions about what we envision for workers in a 21st century economy. Our answer is simple and clear. Workers' future should be shaped by the same values that built the American middle class, values we can live by in a 21st century economy. We must rebuild our economy, yes, and leave it better than the one we found, certainly, but we have to do it without leaving our values behind. The President has made clear that putting American workers back to work will require immediate, bold, and sustained action. Several weeks ago, President Obama sent the American Jobs Act to Congress. Last week, it came up for a vote in the Senate, where it received majority support but didn't pass the 60-vote filibuster threshold. Congress can get Americans back to work. They can enact tax cuts for small businesses and consumers and begin to restore economic confidence if they will just pass the American Jobs Act. The President has made clear he's not going to take no for an answer, especially when the alternatives being offered are the same failed policies that got us into this mess in the first place. The American Jobs Act creates jobs by laying the foundation for a 21st century economy based on our shared values. They are values that say tax cuts should benefit working families and small businesses, not simply the wealthiest among us. Values that hold we can make vital investments in areas that will help our economy grow while still living within our means to reduce the nation's deficit. Values that hold America cannot afford to have second-rate schools or broken down schools, roads, and bridges, especially not when we have millions of workers ready and eager to get back to work fixing them. Values that hold we're unwilling to abandon the low-income or unemployed workers that have been hit hardest by the Great Recession. Values that require our recovery include an ongoing commitment to strengthening the middle class and rebuilding the pathways into the middle class for those who've been left behind for far too long. Here's how the President's American Jobs Act would make these values real in the lives of America's working families. Succeeding in a 21st century economy will require a tax code that levels the playing field for small business owners and entrepreneurs, gives companies incentives to hire and expand, and gives tax breaks to working families instead of the top 1%. The American Jobs Act includes just this type of tax reform. It cuts payroll taxes in half for companies on the first $5 million of payroll, a cut focused on small business. In Ohio, 200,000 businesses will benefit. The Jobs Act includes a complete payroll tax holiday for firms that increase their payrolls by adding new workers or give raises to their existing employees. The Jobs Act gives tax credits to employers for hiring returning veterans and extends firms' ability to expense investments in new equipment through 2012. And the Act also introduces reforms and reduces regulatory burdens so that entrepreneurs and small businesses can have more ready access to the capital that they need. The American Jobs Act also puts more money into the pockets of every working family, cutting payroll taxes in half for 160 million workers next year. The typical family in Ohio has an income of about $46,000 a year. They will get a tax cut of $1,400. But the President's deficit reduction plan also better aligns our tax code with our values, prioritizing investment in the people, businesses, and areas of research that will help grow our economy. It will ensure that those who are making $50 million a year are not paying a lower tax rate than those making $50,000 a year. Combined with the spending cuts agreed to earlier this year, the President's plan will reduce the debt by over $4 trillion over the next 10 years. It will pay for the American Jobs Act, reform the tax code to make it fairer, and significantly reduce our debt and our deficit. No one disputes that we have to make difficult choices to help pull the country out of a difficult period. But for the past decade, we've allowed corporations to write the rules that regulate their industries and the wealthiest among us to feed at the tax trough. The vast majority of people have been left on their own, struggling with stagnant wages while the cost of everything around them continues to rise. Now it's time for the choices we make to align with our values. Our society must ensure a fair opportunity for everyone, opportunity for all Americans to take a risk, open a business, find a job, and operate in a system that celebrates both fairness and economic growth. Beyond reforming the tax code, there's more we need to do to lay the foundation for success in a 21st century economy. This means making investments in areas crucial to continued growth and long-term success, like infrastructure and education. First, succeeding in the 21st century means having the best prepared, most innovative workers in the world. We've long known that what you learn is essential to what you earn. So raising real wages over time will require providing workers with greater opportunities for skills development and the chance to acquire industry-recognized credentials. The President has said many times that this effort begins by improving K-12 schools so they're worthy of our students' potential. We can't expect our kids to compete with students around the world in school buildings that are literally falling down around them. The Jobs Act includes $25 billion in funding to repair and modernize at least 35,000 schools across the country. We have millions of construction workers looking for jobs. The American Jobs Act puts them back to work modernizing these schools, creating as many as 12,800 jobs right here in Ohio. While other countries like South Korea are investing in teachers, we're laying them off in droves. The President's Jobs Act will prevent up to 280,000 teacher layoffs, including 14,200 here in Ohio. The act also includes an additional $5 billion to support the hiring and retention of first responders. We have an infrastructure in the United States that most recently received a grade of D from the American Society of Civil Engineers. Now, I've been out of the classroom for a while, but my recollection is D is not a very good grade. It's the average grade in your classes, Joe, but I know it's a very bad grade for most of us. The American Jobs Act provides $50 billion. You're not going to have any enrollment in any of your classes now. See, I just killed it for you. The American Jobs Act, though, provides $50 billion of immediate investment to jumpstart critical projects repairing roads, bridges, and airports. But it also creates, for the first time, a national infrastructure bank to leverage private capital investment in rebuilding our infrastructure. These investments will create hundreds of thousands of jobs. Combined with expanded access to wireless and broadband in communities across the country, the Jobs Act will make critical improvements to an infrastructure that was once the best in the world and can be again. Some of the most important provisions of the American Jobs Act will help to fulfill our commitment to rebuilding a middle class that has been attacked from every angle for decades, and expanding opportunity for low-income and disadvantaged populations to find pathways into the middle class. First, the American Jobs Act will extend unemployment benefits for the long-term unemployed. And let me just say, this isn't just the right thing to do. It's sound economic policy. Unemployed workers spend every single dollar that they get, and they do it right away. So every dollar we invest in UI assistance goes directly into the economy and produces $2 of economic activity. In Ohio, this extension will save 80,000 people from losing their benefits in just the first 6 weeks, and it will pump millions of dollars into the Ohio economy. But along with the benefits extension, the President has proposed important reforms that will transform the unemployment system into an employment and re-employment system. The Jobs Act will test innovative strategies that build job-ready skills and connect job seekers to real job opportunities. 4 proposals in the Jobs Act draw from and improve upon programs that have already been tested in states around the country. And these proposals will help to put the 250,000 long-term unemployed in Ohio back to work. The Bridge to Work reforms will build off existing programs like Georgia Works or Opportunity North Carolina and similar programs in Utah and Texas. These programs will permit long-term unemployed workers to continue to receive their UI benefits while they take temporary voluntary jobs with a private sector employer. But the President's version of this program assures that workers will get real jobs. The minimum wage will apply, labor standards protections will be enforced, and employers won't be able to use the program as a substitute for hiring workers full-time. Work-sharing programs, like those already operating in 20 states, will prevent layoffs in the first place by allowing workers to receive prorated UI benefits when businesses reduce their hours without having to lay the workers off. Work-share works. Small businesses keep their skilled workers and can scale production up when business picks up. Employees get to stay on their health insurance and other benefits plans. They keep their skills sharp, and they work part-time without a significant loss of income because they continue to receive their UI benefits. Most importantly, they stay connected to their employer and they remain in the labor market. The American Jobs Act also includes support for self-employment assistance programs. Not every worker wants to work in traditional employment relationships with existing firms. They want to innovate. They want to put their ingenuity and their entrepreneurial spirit to work. They want to chart their own path. Self-employment assistance allows unemployed workers to collect UI while receiving guidance, advice, and support to start their own small businesses. Finally, the President has proposed a Pathways Back to Work Fund to help those who've been hit hardest by the recession. Pathways Back to Work will provide hundreds of thousands of low-income, unemployed youth and adults with opportunities to work and to receive needed training in growth industries. Pathways has 3 parts. The first part is a $1.5 billion investment in summer jobs and year-round jobs for low-income youth. Now, the Recovery Act had a successful summer jobs program that put 376,000 low-income young people to work in 2009 and 2010. Second, the Jobs Act will invest $2 billion in subsidized employment opportunities for low-income individuals who are unemployed. Again, there was a Recovery Act program that was called the TANF Emergency Contingency Fund. 260,000 low-income individuals got jobs in 2009, 2010 through that program. And then finally, the Jobs Act will give states and local governments an opportunity to propose promising, innovative work-based job and job training initiatives that will get low-income adults and youths into jobs quickly. We have to acknowledge that learning occurs on the job as well as in the classroom. And long stretches away from work can make it harder for an unemployed worker to succeed in the labor market and the workplace. These reforms will adapt the UI system to a different kind of unemployment that has developed since the creation of the unemployment system in the 1930s, and it will adapt the system to the needs of both employers and workers. But raising real wages into the future will also require providing workers with greater opportunities for skills development and acquisition of industry-recognized credentials. These steps are critical to narrowing wage inequality and continuing to build the middle class. The President's proposed UI reforms are only one part of a larger strategy to empower workers with more skills development opportunities. We've reformed our public workforce investment system to adapt to the times and both to the needs of workers and employers. As part of this year's budget deal with congressional leaders, President Obama insisted on the creation of a workforce innovation fund, which sets aside $125 million to foster innovation throughout the public workforce system and to more closely marry skills development to economic development. Just a few weeks ago, my boss, Secretary Solis, announced new grants to help community colleges manage the exploding demand for education that I talked about earlier. The Community College and Career Training Initiative will support innovative partnerships between community colleges and employers with a particular focus on growth industries. The continuing globalization of labor and product markets requires that we modernize our skills development programs. Competition for jobs is no longer found locally, regionally, or even nationally. As trade barriers continue to fall, American workers are competing against their counterparts in Mumbai and Beijing, Bogota and Seoul. As I said earlier in my remarks, the conditions that led to economic uncertainty for workers didn't develop overnight, and they didn't begin 4 years ago with the onset of the Great Recession. Many are the continuing effects of long-term trends. New policies won't eliminate these problems overnight either. But we can do better by adapting government responses to changes in workplaces and the labor market. Our task now is to help shape a recovery that values innovation and creation, hard work, and genuine accomplishment, to shape a recovery that aligns with our values. Fairness in our tax code, our educational system, and in the opportunities we provide to workers, a commitment to help those most affected by this recession through no fault of their own, a promise of opportunity for every person who wants it and is willing to work hard to get it. Now, there are still those who argue that these values undermine economic competitiveness, that in a modern global economy, the only value that matters is found at the bottom of a balance sheet. This is a short-sighted philosophy. It ignores the qualities that made the American economy the strongest in the world and provided security and prosperity for generations of working families. It's a philosophy that disregards what we know to be economically effective and morally just. It's a view that suggests that the only way for a society to prosper is for inequality to expand and for large segments of the population to scrape by while a few accumulate wealth beyond imagination. We reject this view. We reject it because it ignores what we've known for generations, that a thriving middle class is the cornerstone of broadly shared prosperity, and that a prosperous future for America in a 21st century economy involves a level playing field and a restoration of opportunities for working families. Working families need Congress to take action on the American Jobs Act. They want to believe that Washington can work for them as well as it works for the country's biggest corporations. Working families want to pass along to their children the same kinds of opportunities their parents provided to them. They want to believe the future holds possibilities and success, not simply a struggle for survival. America can and will compete and thrive in the 21st century if we value the working men and women who are the foundation of this country's success. Their needs are urgent. Our actions should be as well. So let me thank the University of Toledo once again for inviting me to be here today. Thank you so much for your attention.
Deputy Secretary Harris has graciously agreed to take questions. Since he's standing over there, I will recognize people and we'll take your questions. Professor Barrett.
Several Republican presidential contenders have suggested that one of the things we need to focus on to revitalize our economy is bringing back jobs that have been offshore or outsourced. They've suggested lowering the corporate tax rate, which seems kind of weird since very few companies have been incorporated elsewhere, but they've also suggested lowering the minimum wage, which may bring jobs back, but at a lower pace. Is the solution to reattract the high labor-intensive manufacturing operations to the U.S., and if so, how should we do it? Or is the solution to be found more in invigorating the small business foundation of our country?
Well, I agree with the goal of trying to bring jobs back to the United States, but cutting the corporate tax rate is not going to accomplish that. The marginal U.S. corporate tax rate is not so far in excess of what we see overseas that that's the decision-making point for American corporations. It is a factor, but it's a factor on a long list of other factors that are relevant to decision-making about where you're going to site your factory. So the availability of a skilled and ready workforce is very important. That's one of the reasons why Toledo, for example, has been able to keep significant auto manufacturing here, and you have manufacturing in other industries because you have a skilled and ready workforce that's able to do the work. Now, you still have a high unemployment rate here, but you have a lot of folks who are ready to go to work. So that's a good argument for folks to cite here in Toledo in the United States more generally. Reducing the minimum wage, that lasted about 13 seconds in the debate on the other side of the aisle, and the reason for that is it won't work. It's just not a job-creating action. We see when there are increases in the minimum wage that we don't see a significant disemployment effect. We don't lose a lot of jobs when the minimum wage goes up. The reason for that is, here's what my labor economy, I'll break into labor economics just for a second. The elasticities in the low-wage labor market are very low, so you don't lose a lot of jobs when you have wages going up, or you don't gain a lot of jobs when wages go down. The other thing is, we could impoverish ourselves as a country and completely destroy the middle class and drive people into a form of serfdom as a way to grow. It's hard to imagine that those are the values that Americans want to carry forward. We need to take a high road path where we're using advanced manufacturing technologies, high-skilled workers, investment in basic research, things like that that will make us the most sophisticated economy, or keep us as the most sophisticated economy in the world. Driving to the bottom is not the path to success.
Our law faculty is active among the questioners. Professor Strang up in the balcony.
Thank you for your comments. And let me preface what I was going to say by saying that I grew up in a blue-collar family, UAW, teachers, with my dad and my uncles. So I'm very sympathetic to many of the things that you said. My own view is that if you have a regime of free trade, which my understanding is the Obama administration is not challenging internationally or nationally, interstate, then we don't have a way to attract, in this comparison to Mr. Barrett's point, manufacturing jobs, which can be more highly remunerated, is to lower regulation, lower costs in other ways. And the two examples that I think of are high unionization rates and then high regulation rates. And let me just give two anecdotes. One is Canon moved out of its historic home in Peoria down to Peoria, Illinois, down to Texas. The explicit reason was lower labor costs. Ohio Hart, which was historically from Bryan, Ohio, moved its manufacturing from China. The explicit reason was lower labor costs. And so, since there's no challenge to the free trade regime, both nationally or internationally, what would be the reason not to move to either lower unionization rates or lower regulation?
Well, let me say, it's hard to imagine going to lower unionization rates. I must say, I'm always a little surprised, and I hear the argument. This is not a direct response to you. I hear this in Washington all the time. If only the unions ... Unions represent 7% of the private sector workforce in the United States. After a while, the boogeyman becomes so small that it's a little hard to keep calling him a boogeyman.
State by state, though, Toledo has very high unionization rates. Texas has very low.
That is true, but across the United, even in the states with very high union density rates, the highest union density rate in the United States is in New York, and that's mostly because of public sector unionization, not private sector unionization. So I find it, that to me, that argument, except in idiosyncratic cases, to me is a problematic argument. Again, I think you're right that if you're going to have an international regime of fairly free trade, and I don't mean fair and free trade, but reasonably free, it's not really free everywhere. It's certainly not free in places like China, where you get a lot of subsidization of industry, you get a lot of currency manipulation and other things. But if you're going to have a free trade regime, you have to ask the question, what's the basis upon which we're going to compete? One basis is to have fairer trade rules. And that's something that the president did in his renegotiation of the Korea Free Trade Agreement and Colombia Free Trade Agreement. Panama was very small, so it didn't matter a lot. But in those two, he renegotiated them and changed the rules so that U.S. manufacturers, for example, and U.S. food producers would have a fairer shot to get their products into the Korean market in particular. That's the largest of the three markets. So the problem, for example, in Korea with auto trade is that while there are 650,000 Korean cars being sold in the United States, there were only 6,500 U.S. cars being sold into the Korean market, and that wasn't because of tariffs, it was because of non-tariff barriers. So when Ron Kirk negotiated the Korea Free Trade Agreement at the president's direction, he changed the mix, changed the rules, and now the UAW is able to support a free trade agreement because many, many more U.S. cars will be able to go into the Korean market. That's one way of going after the free trade regime and get it to be a more balanced free trade, balanced, I don't want to keep using the word free because I'm skeptical of that idea, but a more balanced trade regime where everybody really is competing on an equal basis. But to me, the idea that the way to win is to slash wages and to eliminate environmental protections and to eliminate labor protections, you have to ask yourself, what country are you going to be left with? What will victory end up looking like? There is an alternative model, and we're seeing it in the U.S. auto industry and other parts of the manufacturing sector that are beginning to come back, where you have a high-skilled workforce engaged in advanced manufacturing and design. You end up with a lot of job growth. So when I was in Texas and I talked to some of the folks who are inshoring, no longer outshoring, but offshoring, but inshoring their jobs, insourcing their jobs into the United States, the number one thing they talked about was, we love that folks are trained well here. We love the UT system. We love the tremendous public investment in community colleges. We love the Texas A&M system that they have. So ironically, the state that says we're doing it by getting government out of the way is relying on a government-funded education system to attract companies to do business in their state. So I think there is an alternative path. It is working around the country. I think it's working here in part. So I'm not for impoverishment as a strategy for success.
Professor Richmond.
Is this what your faculty meetings are like, just out of curiosity? Wow, it's an active faculty. It's great.
I'm very interested in the durability of recessions. This may be out of your area, it's not specifically labor economics, but do you have a view on which recessions last longer and why?
I don't have a good answer to that. This recession has been the deepest, and with respect to I want to take it out of the phrase recession, because recession is a technical phrase having to do with shrinkage in the economy, when GDP shrinks. But I think of it as a jobs recession that we're experiencing, and we're continuing to experience now. This jobs recession was much deeper and much longer than anyone anticipated back in 2007 when the recession formally began. And the question of how you recover out of it, I think, differs depending upon the state of the economy when you went in. So, for example, when President Clinton took office and we were in a mild recession coming out of the Bush presidency, you didn't have the volume of public debt that we have now. And that's a question for the capital markets. That has consequences for the capital markets. When we had the recession in the early 1980s, we didn't have the kind of fervent anti-tax spirit that we're hearing in Washington right now, so that President Reagan was able to propose a significant tax increase as a way of increasing spending into the economy to get the economy going again. But I'm not enough of a macroeconomist to be able to tell you the real details of why we are where we are from a macro perspective. Sorry.
Joe.
I remember one part of the American Jobs Act was that it would make it illegal for employers to discriminate on basis of prior employment. How important is that in going forward to rebuilding the economy?
I think that's an excellent question. I can't quantify how important it is, but I think it is a very important symbol to the business community, because we are seeing advertisements around the country that say, really hearkening back to much uglier days in our country, no unemployed need apply. You know, when you have 14 million people who are unemployed, many of them highly skilled workers, that's a really troubling sign. One of the interesting developments that we've seen, sad and interesting developments that we've seen in the labor market during the course of this recession, jobs recession, is that older workers are staying on unemployment much, much longer than they ever did, and much, much longer than younger workers. And that's regardless of education level, skill level, work experience. Older workers are facing a lot of discrimination in the labor market right now. They're being put at the back of the queue. And so when I see no unemployed need apply, to me that's a little bit of a proxy for no older workers, no experienced workers need apply. And you know, I think there are some very, very limited legitimate circumstances where you could say, I don't want to hire this particular unemployed worker, not the right skill set, unemployed for a legitimate reason, you know, buggy whip manufacturing skills, and I really need to build Apple phone, you know, iPhones. But it's a troubling sign, because I worry that that entire generation of folks are going to be forced in their 50s and beyond into early retirement when they still have a lot more productivity and a lot more knowledge to give in the workplace.
Dr. Gold.
Thank you for joining us. I very much enjoyed your remarks. I think many of us believe that higher education is at a bit of a crossroads now, as well as the economy and the other external megatrends. I wonder if you would, as a large public university with deep roots in traditional undergraduate education, professional education, and graduate education in the upper Midwest, I wonder if you might give us some advice as to where the great universities of tomorrow are going to be positioned in the solution to these challenges that we face.
Yeah, boy, that's a great question. I'm not sure I'm really qualified to answer it, because I've worked in higher education and I've gone through higher education, but I'm not a scholar of higher education. The conversation that we're in with higher education is mostly with community colleges, because that's where the short-term skills development and connection to employers occurs. But I think public four-year schools have the same opportunity. But I'm hesitant to say that we want four-year education to become a strictly vocationally focused enterprise. I have heard discussions, frankly, in Washington, I don't know how far they're going, about rethinking the Pell program, which, I mean, the Pell Grant program is one of the largest funders of skills development, maybe the largest funder outside of private sector investment. So it's one of the largest public investments in skills development that our society has, a $20 billion program. And there has been some discussion about whether or not there should be some connection between the investment that Pell makes in a student's degree and whether or not that degree is going to end up in a job. There's a lot of pushback on that approach, because those who are firm advocates of traditional liberal arts education or just traditional higher education more broadly are quite hesitant to go that way, and they're hostile to going that way, and there is a value to things like arts education and basic research and other things that occur in higher education. But that is part of the discussion. Now, does that discussion outlive the jobs recession? I'm not sure, but folks are looking for pots of money that they can use to get workers the skills they need to be able to do the advanced manufacturing that we've been talking about and other kinds of high road strategies for the American economy. But your question may be a little too big for me.
Take one more question. Gentleman up here.
You mentioned that small businesses will be getting like a tax cut with the American Jobs Act. And with that said, that's provided that they can show that they have actually increased in employment or growth in employment. Is that condition present in the Bush tax cuts? And if not, does that condition allow these tax cuts to police themselves in a way that the Bush tax cuts did not?
It's not a self-police system. You'd have to demonstrate that your payroll has actually grown. you'd have to show that it has grown either by the number of employees that you've employed or that you've given your current employees a raise. The cuts that you're referring to that were passed prior to the president coming in were more about individual tax rates and much less about business investment. There were some corporate tax cuts as well, but they weren't small business focused. That is simply a function of income. It's the top rate was reduced. So a part of the president's plan to pay for the American Jobs Act is to allow those tax cuts to expire, and they will expire this year. I suspect they will end up expiring this year. The risk is that if what was passed during the Bush administration was not merely tax cuts for those earning more than $250,000 a year, but also tax cuts for those below. So, for example, the adjustment to the alternative minimum tax was one of the things that occurred. There is a risk that those will expire as well. So there's going to have to be a deal cut for example, to extend the payroll tax cut that's in the American Jobs Act and other middle-class tax cuts that the president very much would like to see extended, but that are at risk if we don't take action. The question is whether we get into the same situation we were in a year ago, where one party in Washington was pushing very hard to marry the middle-class tax cuts with tax cuts for the rich. We'll see how that debate goes. I'm going to take one more. I hate to let your colleague go.
Okay, one more question.
This is drawing question in terms of communicating with the public. It's a two-part question, so bear with me. All the statistics you share should be using for the years of unemployment. Yet, if it is taking traction, it is not at the level sufficient to go and focus upon that elected officials. So I would like to know why you believe that's the case. And the second part is what's happening in our people marching on Wall Street. That's something you would expect in Europe or Asia or other economies. So what does this tell us and how would it change that?
Yeah. The question about getting the message out is a very important question, and let me just say it's part of the reason I'm in Toledo today and Cleveland tomorrow, is because we need to communicate more effectively about and more expansively about the American Jobs Act. The president is in Virginia and North Carolina. He was in Michigan. The vice president was in Michigan. He was here in Ohio. My boss has been to Ohio a number of times. We need to keep talking about it and getting the message out to workers and also to small businesses. I was able to do that a little bit today with Congresswoman Capter and the audience of folks who are job seeking at the jobs fair. So I think that's right. We need to continue to talk about it. The president has been relentless in talking about it. I was with him in Denver when he talked about it. I did some amplification in Denver, went to Rhode Island. I mean, we're all fanning out to talk about it and to let people know why it's an important thing to do. What's going on with Occupy Wall Street? I think it's a fascinating sign of where we are in our country. The president has talked about how the protests on Wall Street, and not just in Wall Street, but all over the country. I mean, there are 80 or 100 cities in the United States that have Occupy fill in the blank. And I think it is a reflection of growing disenchantment with deep and persistent and expanding income inequality in our country. But I think even more fundamentally than that, I think there is a deep frustration among the American people at watching a governing class in Washington that seems to be more focused on feeding the rich than on assuring jobs for the rest. What we're seeing in Washington is not really gridlock. What we're seeing is really a fundamental battle over what government's role should be. And the frustration that I think that we're seeing in the streets of Washington is as much about gigantic tax cuts and bailouts for corporations and bankers as it is about unemployment. My view is that Occupy Wall Street is a commentary on the punditocracy's view of the 2010 election. I think we've fundamentally misunderstood the 2010 election. It was not a Tea Party election that wanted less spending. It was an election by frustrated people who can't see how their government is spending money on them. middle-class and working-class Americans have felt for a long time that their government is not working for them. And that was a big part of the motivation behind the Jobs Act. I think the President wanted the country to understand that he's focused on improving their lot and making their lives better, and that government can succeed in doing that. And he's holding Congress's feet to the fire and saying, this is a test for you. Can you operate in a way that will result in improving the lives of working families? So in that way, I think the spirit of what's going on Wall Street and around the country, and now we're seeing it around the world, is very much what the President's trying to accomplish in Washington. Thank you all very much.